Might get a bit of it anyway. Right, so here's, I've got here just a piece of scrap paper because I'm going to start off with just doing a very quick sketch of the kind of shape of the hair that I want to get into my drawing, just to sort of practice and see how it works together really. So I think the key elements are, obviously we're going to need to put in the long ears, and it's this face with this very sort of, the eye is quite large, so this is quite a sort of rough version. I'll do, when we come to the sort of the next one, we'll do it in sort of pencil first. But you've got this very big eye and then a very square kind of face and quite a strong, powerful jaw. They're surprisingly powerful animals, actually. And then you can see they've got an area of kind of muscle, big muscle in the shoulder there, and then they stretch out and kind of go into that strong muscle. I'm not going to fit him all on this page. It's going to be, I'm going to have to imagine his legs going off here. So this is the kind of, and it has that sort of, and when it's at full stretch like that, it's completely sort of taken up in that movement, that sort of, it's almost like it's flying through the air at this point. It's just been captured at the full extent of its jump. So it's completely sort of stretched along in that kind of way. And I think this sort of relationship between the straight body and then this quite upright almost neck with the ears kind of coming, this sort of shape here, which is what we want to pull out. As an illustrator, what we're trying to do is not necessarily create a nature sort of, like a sort of medical illustration where everything is completely perfect, but it's trying to get that sense of the movement in the animal and the sort of story of the animal much more so. And if I'm looking at it now, actually, I think these paws need to come a bit longer because you've got the end of the nose there, and the paw is actually coming almost beyond that. They have much more elongated paws and legs than rabbits do. They're much more like, I said, like a sort of deer in construction. So my idea is to have a full moon kind of in the picture, somewhere like this, and then to have the hair leaping. I'm thinking I'm going to go for the hair underneath, actually, because if it's above the moon, that might look a bit too much like Hey Diddle Diddle the cow, in the fiddle, sort of, jumping over the moon. But I'm seeing it something like this sort of shape here, where it's going to. So this is my very quick cartoon sketch. I find it quite useful just to do little tiny workouts before I sort of start on the whole piece, because I want to kind of get a sense of, so this is my paper, this is kind of what I'm after with the kind of moon. Now, thinking about the sort of the light on the fur that one of those pictures that we looked at had, I'm quite tempted to keep to sort of like to really get the background of this piece quite dark and leaving the moon and the hair initially quite white, but then maybe even taking the body of the hair down quite sort of dark, so that I'm then going to have a halo of light kind of coming around it in that sort of way that we had on the piece there, which might be something I'm going to add in on sort of dry paper when it's dried down a bit. So that's kind of what I'm doing. And I'm going to slightly exaggerate that curve in the back of the hare's body so that it mimics the shape of this circular moon. Right, so that's my little thinking page of, just sort of working out where I want to go with it. So the next thing I'm going to do is tackle mine. I've just got an A3 piece of paper here, and as I said before, I've got my old tin lid to draw around, so state-of-the-art equipment as ever. I'm also going to choose quite a limited colour palette on this. I'm not going to try and do very realistic or naturalistic colours, because it's going to have more of a kind of design feel, and because I love those blue colours that we were looking at in the artist that was painting them on ceramic. I'm using blue watercolour pencil to draw with, and I'm going to use this to sort of sketch my hair and moon, and then because I'm going to be using watercolour paint, afterwards, I can almost disappear my painting lines, so that you're not going to see a lot of these afterwards. Now, I hope that's coming across all right on the camera. I might just, if I put too much light on, it disappears, you see, unfortunately. So, right, so my hair is going to fit into this sort of curve around here. So I'm going to sort of do some construction lines first, just to sort of decide that, that's fallen off one, I'll live with that. So his back has got to come in a similar kind of arc to this moon shape that I've got here. And so then the front end is going to come, I think, I know what would be quite, so the ideas occur to me all the time. I'm going to just take his ears just into that disc of the moon so that they're just making that little, going to be like a silhouette against that shape there. I think that will just sort of give him a bit of extra gravitas. And then he's going to have, his shape of his head is really quite square, so that's going to come into this sort of area here. Then I've got this big shoulder muscle which I need to get in sort of round there, and his legs coming in. Elbow's got a big there, so let's just straighten that, reduce that down a bit, and then I'm just sort of like, paw is going to be somewhere like that, sort of there. Let me just slightly bring my camera down so you can see a bit more what I'm doing. That's better. Then I want to get his leg muscle in, so this leg muscle is going to come in somewhere sort of around here. Again, this is why we're keeping this quite sketchy at the moment. Now, in the sort of wildlife picture, his leg is coming out quite sort of straight, but because I'm kind of wanting to pull this around the moon, I'm going to have to, instead of taking it sort of out from here, I'm going to slightly change that angle so that it's going to come up a bit artificially, but it's going to come as if he's diving sort of off into sort of a diving board, like he's sort of swimming through space. So he's coming around that shape. And the obvious thing would be to take the ears around in the same way, but I said I just really quite like them staying with that kind of upright feel. And then you've got a little tuck in, and then his little expanse of his belly and chest area sort of coming round there. So I thought that's not quite a naturalistic pose for the hare. It sort of should just sort of bring that feel of it sort of leaping through the sort of night sky. And again, the key things I want to get in is the eye position, which is really quite close, almost at the very top of the skull. There's almost no gap between the top of the skull and the eye, because again, they're prey animals, so they're sort of always on the watch out for anything from above. Really is their main sort of source of danger. And then they have this very strong line that we saw in that close-up photo, and that angular kind of face coming down and bringing into the sort of the snout. And it's these, I'm going to try and keep these lines very straight, and he's going to be all about angles and squares, and then he's going to come into his neck, and then actually I think I can just bring this shoulder up a bit, so it's up sort of forward, and maybe bring the chest, just curl it straight down like that into a sort of a more angular shape, and bring his elbow in. And this is why, you know, we should always keep it quite sketchy to begin with, because we can always find chunkier media to kind of like make it more direct once we're happy with where it is. And if you leave on the page the bits that you haven't quite got right, and you go back and visit them, then you can see what you're changing. Because here, I think the back of the head is too thin. If I take that line away with a rubber, I'm not going to know where I was. But now that I can see, I don't want that line, I can see that, right, I do want to go into that line and sort of push that hump of his shoulder up a bit. And I can always come back later and find ways of hiding any sort of marks. So until you're happy with the shape, keep your sort of marks in. Don't come in and sort of spend hours removing them until you're sure of where you do want to be. That's it. So that's sort of taken that sort of head into the ears, and then let's make sure that's got a nice blunt nose, quite big nostrils, because scent and hearing is all extremely important to them for survival. And then they've got the eye sort of coming inside that white sort of triangle, that sort of oval shape. So that's hopefully given him some recognisable features without being too photoreal. And then you've got a nice line of his belly, and we can get that curve, which we've exaggerated about. This rabbit, this hare, you can't see his tail. Excuse me. So sorry, I've got a tickle. And I've only got my paint water left to drink. I'm going to make it a bit more obvious, because we're doing something more of a design than a photo. So I'm just going to expend that there. And then I think this foot slightly bothered me. You'd have his back ankle. Maybe that foot going up there doesn't work. Maybe I should take it down. Is that working better? Yeah, I think it's working better, isn't it, to bring that down? That looked too weird. I think we'll get too weird there. Let's touch it so it's more at that sort of angle. I think that looks better. So it's kind of pushing off the side of the page. think we'll go for that. I think that going up was a bit too distorted for me. Right, so I've got my sort of shape of this hare kind of leaping through the space. Then I've got this big moon sort of space around it. So what I'm going to do is now use some dark blue watercolour, and I'm going to paint around the hare and around the moon and leave them as white spaces at the moment. I'm not going to wet the paper beforehand because I want to be relatively controlled with where I'm putting this paint. I don't want it to be doing too much merrily running everywhere. So I'm going to mix up a nice watery blue. Again, it's going to lighten anyway, so we're just at the moment, this is not the final colour where we're going to be at. We might change and go over it again because it tends to fade down. So I'm just going to, without too much worry and consideration really, just try and put in these areas of blue on our piece. And I'm going to leave him quite lit up at the moment and quite sort of white. So at the moment I'm not worrying too much about surface or colour. I just want to start seeing this as quite a bold design. Now I'm a big fan of white drawing pens. I use them a lot in my work, and I use them to kind of add detail and add all sorts of highlights and things after the paint has dried. And I love creating a sort of painted surface to work on and then working into that with pens afterwards. So I will be doing a fair bit of that. So I'm just sweeping the paint round. And I quite like it when, you know, you see the lines. I'm trying to, I suppose, move my lines in a way that relates to the moon. So I'm not just filling it in like I was painting a wall. I am following the curve of the moon because that can sometimes give us some nice feel. I don't want to get too scruffy at the edges and sort of just, you know, paint off into nowhere because I've got bored with it. I'm trying to at least keep the flow of that moon shape and taking it round the sort of shape. So he's starting to, the night sky as it were, is starting to appear. I'm going to get rid of that foot there, aren't I? So I'm going to paint that out and just try and move it in. I'm also a great fan of gel pens, things with a bit of glitter and silver and metallic pens because they're so much fun to use. And what's wrong? I think if you're doing illustrations, you can add loads of shiny bits like that and things in. So if you've ever sort of looked at all those packs of lovely, exciting colour pens in the kids section and thought, oh, that's nuts, you know, I'm too serious for that. No, go and buy some, enjoy them, have fun with gold, because this would look fantastic with adding in some sort of silvers and golds to it. Because we're thinking of this being nighttime, so we're thinking of, you know, frosty nights and stars, and so some gold and silver work would not be in any way out of place on this. So I'm just going to slightly tilt down so we can see, but we can see he's starting to emerge from the night sky. I'm going to catch that before it goes across him too much. There we go. And I just like using that sort of straight brush to kind of work in quite straight movements around, and like where you've got that nice sort of like little elbow there, you can just put the brush in and kind of pull that down, and then that really helps to bring that shape out. So we're looking at sort of the negative space around the hair as opposed to the actual body itself. We might end up doing some detailing down here of sort of grasses and things frozen at night, like some of those lovely hogweed plants that have that lovely sort of star-like structure down here, because they're very iconic, and we can sort of see this as being twilight or sort of full moon. The moon's just come up on those very sort of crisp nights. And there we are. So we've just got, just to bring those marks down now to kind of towards the bottom, and it starts to look quite sort of oceany, isn't it? It's almost like he's swimming through space and time. Let me just come back a little bit with my camera so we can see where we're going. That's it. And then I can just bring that down, and I can get more, I'm just bringing the colour down to the bottom of the page, not very heavily, just keeping it quite light so that it's just so that I've got something on the surface there. And then just up here, I just want to take, to soften that edge so I don't have such a ring round the moon, just bringing in those sort of blue corners there. And just moving that away and up. So hopefully now what I'm seeing is this sort of light of the moon and the full moon. I've just slightly gone over the edge of my circle there, but you know, we can live with that. I suppose we can sort that out later and it won't notice too much. And I just want to soften that line a little bit by adding some pigment around it so it's nice and not too stripy. So I'm now thinking about the body of the hare. I'm thinking that if this is the light of the moon, if we've got this sort of moon shining down on this animal as he's sort of running through the wilderness, you're going to get much more light on the top half of him, and he's going to have some shadow underneath. So I'm going to, having said I'm going to use not too naturalistic colours, I think because I've got this really lovely blue, and I'm going to get some more blues into this night sky, and I want to paint it really much in shades of blue and not in shades of black, but to keep it in kind of blue. I quite like to use some quite rusty sort of terracotta colours and gold colours on the body of the animal so that it's standing out against this background. But when I first come in, I'm going to put some shadows in, and I'm actually going to use a purple or a lilac to put in the shadows, and I'm going to leave them to dry for like 5 minutes or so, and then when I come and put the more natural sort of brown tones onto him, the blue shadow will already be there, and it will help to, as an underglaze, to kind of come out through the body and kind of give it that more sort of shadowed feel. So looking at where the light would be, I think they're definitely, obviously the back and the top of everything is going to be lighter, so he's going to have a sort of sweep of shadow underneath his belly, sort of just coming through, just up to where that elbow line is, sort of under there, like that. And then you're going to get another area of shadow coming under the chin. I'm using quite a square brush, because I do tend to like square brushes. We've got this very strong cheekbone here, and I can put the edge of the brush up to that drawn line and then just flick that little purple kind of shadow underneath it there. And then on the leg section here, I want to bring some shadow under that sort of muscle of the leg along there and down the foot sort of side. And that's starting to get shadow. And then I can sort of just bring a little softer bit of shadow up in, and we've got underneath his paw and leg here, just sort of on the underside, softening that through there. And then with the ears, although this is on top of the body, so you think, well, it would have light, because it's this little section of ear that's against the moon, that's going to be almost thrown into silhouette, because it's like holding your hand against a very strong light. So that section of ear with the edge of the moon behind it is going to be in quite dark shadow. So I want to just mark that out as being sort of against the moon. And there's a little tiny bit of the second ear that's doing the same, that's just behind it there. And then actually the rest of it, you're going to get a little bit of shadow on this side, because the moon is kind of coming out, radiating out from this way, and it's just going to put a little bit of shadow on the face of the hare and a little bit on the muzzle here. So just to sort of darken that down in there, and then I suppose you get a little tiny bit underneath his tail as well that we've got in. So even if you're doing a shape that's not representational, to give it a sense of veracity or realness, there we are, I'm just going to put a little slick under there as well. You have to think about where the light would be falling and where the animal, how anything object in this space, even if you're creating a fantastical world, you've still got to a little bit bring in the laws of physics. Can't get away from physics even in fantasy lands. Right, so I think I'm going to add some just while that's drying, I'm going to get a bigger brush and maybe put some more blue tones into the sky, just to sort of see if we can get some nice kind of effects. You'll probably find that against a full moon, actually the area right next to it is going to be brighter in colour than the rest of the sky. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to mix in some of this sort of nice strong turquoisey kind of blue, and then, but quite wetly, get some darker tones in kind of into the sky and into round the creature, just taking my care not to go too into the, if you do get a dribble across the body, we'll work with it, it'll be fine, but I don't mind adding some sort of movement now to some of the sort of upper areas around the background. So we're just doing this really to get that purple to dry, and thinking about the sort of weight and balance of the piece. Really, I need to get this area down here needs to get a lot darker, because that's coming down towards the ground, and obviously the ground has no light source and is unlikely to be very reflective, so it's going to be darker. So let's get some water and some darker blue paint, and because I've left mine a bit like a sort of snowy landscape or a sort of sea, but let's get that sort of line. Let's get some more dark blue into that. So it's just sort of running through. So we've just got some bit more depth into there. And again, on this side, I can get some more darker blue tones in. And that's a bit heavy with the paint there, but I can put that in. And then if I still think it's too heavy, I can always go back with some water and just soften that line a bit so it's not too painty. And because it's, so we're not, this is an illustration, so there's a sort of narrative feel to it. You can go to town on the sky, you can put all sorts of details in, you could get clouds in, so you can get reams of stars, you can get all sorts of frosty kind of surfaces, because it's, as I was saying, you know, we have the liberation of not being artists but being illustrators, which is a lot more fun, I think. It's about having fun and telling a sort of the story of the moment, and just doing stuff because it looks good, because you feel like it, you know. So where this was wet here, I might get in some wetter colours, try and get a bit of just abstract. That's too blocky. I want something just so as it gets a bit more water in there, I can just get some more shapes and spills of water just to add a kind of background that I can work back into later. So I can bring some shadow and just stuff to play with a bit later, just to see what happens. Just some texture and some, you know, so it's not just a flat colour, because we're not, as I keep saying, painting a house here. We're just sort of, we are using a paint medium, and those sort of marks can become very individual. I'm just putting them on, and then I want to add some more water just to kind of get something that's quite nice, where that sort of spilling down there. It's just got a nice motion feel to it, and I can see how later on I might come back and sort of use some of that to create like grass kind of effects or floral undergrowth kind of things happening, but we're just going to leave that in there just so that it's sort of got something going on. Right, so this purple has now dried up quite nicely, so I'm going to be using terracotta kind of colours, and quite sandy colours. I don't want to go too dark to begin with. I'm going to sort of sneak up on the darkness, because we might end up deciding he needs to be darker, but I don't want to go too much too soon. So I want to swap to a rounder brush, just quite a fat round brush, but one that's got a relatively tapered point. And I'm going to bring some areas of colour into the background. Oh dear, someone's heard something that they don't agree with. Yes, our days are punctuated by men bringing parcels. Right, so I've got some sort of terracotta-y kind of red tones, and I'm just going to, again, I'm going to leave his tail a bit white, but I'm just going to paint them in quite lightly. And we'll see, hopefully, quite a lot of water, but where we come over that lilac tone, it's still going to be there as shadow. It's just going to be warmed up by the kind of paint. And I'm just trying to get some paint on all of the body first before I do any kind of detailing, and bring that through. And then I'm going to put a little bit into the ears. So this is kind of like the background colour. So I'm not worrying too much about. I'm just to make sure I'm going to leave that the ring around the eye quite white at the moment, and I want to leave part of that muzzle section where it comes down onto the top there. There's a little bit of white just in there, and then just bring these over, sweep it over the kind of face and body. Just to sort of start getting that colour in. And bring onto the paw there, and then onto, just so that it's all got this one level of tone on it. So we're not sort of, we're just kind of trying to getting a base coat on it first, really. Just to, so there's only white paper showing now where we want it to be white. We're not just trying to get all that sort of in. Yeah, so that's got like some body into animal, and then I'm going to go in for my sort of more terracotta-y kind of colours, and then sort of painting wise, I'm just sort of like, again, flicking and keeping the movement of my brush so that I'm working kind of from head to toe. I want to try and think of the way the hair on the creature, even though I'm not painting a sort of hair, it's difficult to say, isn't it? Because I mean hair as in fuzz, not as in hair as the creature, because I'm not trying to create, you know, one of those drawings where it's hair by hair perfect. It's just a little tiny, the pelt is all in there in perfection. But I'm still aware that the hair on the hair lies in a certain direction, so it's moving all the time from head to toe, head to tail. So although these are quite long strokes, I don't want to paint up that way. I want to kind of start this way and always move across, and it helps with the sense of motion and movement as well with him, because it's sort of creating that movement in the paint strokes just to sort of bring those through. Just working those up across the body, so I'm getting that sort of movement. And then when I come onto the leg, paint strokes going across the short width of the leg like that again, so it's got that feel of fluff, of pelt kind of moving through. And I can come down and add some more kind of moving, and just think about where those areas of shadow might come and the areas of texture in the sort of muscle of the animal. Now I'm going to keep it quite light. I'm going to be doing definition with pen. I'm going to be using a pen line to kind of bring a lot more darkness into the piece. You could equally do it with pen if paint, that's more of your kind of thing. But I'm not going to go into pen yet. I will get some very tight detail into it with sort of pen later. So I'm going to go for a darker brown now. I'm mixing up sort of some terracotta and umber to give me a darker sort of tone. So I can come in and just see some darker marks kind of coming round. Just make sure you don't get into that white under the eye. You want to just sort of treat that very carefully and come sort of to bring those round. And I'm going to get a little bit of darkness onto the eye just so that I can start to establish that as being the eye, because it starts to bring it more to life. I'm not doing the whole pupil, so I'm just leaving that. So I definitely want to leave that kind of arc of white again, so that you've got those very wet highlights, and I can come in a bit closer now to that eye with the darker paint sort of moving, but keeping those marks. So we're always sort of moving right to left, and then let's get the nose in sort of darker, and that sort of angular line across the eye, sort of there. If it starts to look, that's looking a little bit beardy, so I'm going to come back with a wet brush and just at the moment just take out so it's not too liney. I don't want to have too much texture at the moment. I'm going to build up on that gradually and come up into the ear and just get that a bit darker. And again, just soften that back. So you just want the edge, you want the edge of the paint, and then just to blend the rest of the line sort of through. And again, let's get some darkness into the ear. And against that sort of moon where it's, as I said, being thrown into kind of silhouette, and just around the back of his head seems a bit darker too. And then I'm going to come down into the body and sort of building up some shadow again on top of that where I've got the lilac. And into the back leg, sort of round through there. Right, okay, so I'm going to come in again a little bit closer around there, and just the eyes do have this, they have this very sort of elongated shape. They're very sort of elegant eyes, and I think we want to bring that out in the, right, so has everyone got some drawing pens to hand? Did I mention drawing pens? Yeah, have you got some, Jean? Well, even if you've got like, we're gonna do a little bit of pen work on top of this as well in a bit. So any sort of pen will probably do. Obviously, you want something even. I mean, you know, I've even used biro with some really interesting results actually. So I'm not even going to knock a black biro, but any sort of like fine liner or a black pen. And I'm just putting a bit of in dark against the sort of neck there, where he's sort of coming. Yes, I'm sure we're artists, probably got something somewhere. I just want to indicate there might be the second foot kind of coming in behind there. I haven't quite got that in, so I can then take that as a kind of, if I'm using the brown there to kind of work on top of the blue, it just looks like a sort of shadowed area kind of coming through. And I'm thinking of taking the whole thing quite a bit darker now, because I want to give it a sort of nighttime feel. So I'm going to do something, we'll see if it works. I just want to just take some blue on my big brush and just sort of come across the body just to kind of darken the whole thing down and make it more kind of nighttime in feel. Just a little bit sort of round there. So that's just giving it a slightly sort of bluer kind of tint. So I'd like to get now some darkness right round very close to the moon. So this is going to be a bit of, I want to leave this to dry a little bit again before I come back and work on it with some pen. So I need to go for my fine brush. There's going to be some quite delicate or concentrated hand work on just around the edge of the moon. And I want to mix up a dark blue and with some black in it. So I want to get a really dark blue. So I want to give that moon, the light of that moon, a real kind of punch. So let's get blue and let's get some black. Have I got black? No, black's over there. Sometimes it's quite hard to see where the black is. Right, yes, I've got a nice inky kind of black darkness. And I'm just going to come in and with my fine brush do a really quite fine line round the edge of the moon, just following that line, just to kind of darken that down. Let's sweep that up round. It's a really very fine line, just quite sort of thin kind of coming round, but it just helps to give that light more sort of punch kind of coming out of it. And again, just bring that line round, because then that's sort of going to give me some more light and colour. Oops, done that a double line. And bring that up, and this is where you can, obviously I'm working relatively quickly. This is something you probably want to take a bit of time over to get it really accurate. But also, I also don't mind if it's not like, you know, like compass drawn accurate, because it is a painting. It's not a mathematical problem. And then once I've got that line in and it's almost sort of dry, I can go in with a larger brush and again just soften a little bit of that line out if I want to. Oh, I've got a runaway drip causing me problems. I'll let it off. Just to sort of like bring some of the colour off again. And what I will do later is with a white pen is to go in and add some highlights and sort of some shimmer coming off that sort of moon. But I'm quite liking it getting quite sort of inky and dark, and now I'm sort of going in with some inkier tones kind of round there. Not maybe all the way round, maybe that's looking quite nice, just to sort of leave some of it, some of that paler kind of colour, so I can brush quite sort of freely round that and give that sort of, by leaving some of the paler blue, it starts to look like the sort of glow coming out of the moon a bit more. So I want to get some nice background going. It's kind of, oh yeah, and I'm quite liking that. So I think I'm going to get some purple and bring some purple lines into it as well, because I want a night sky that's got a lot of life to it. I don't want just a flat black sort of background in any sort of way. So, and using these sort of circular sweeps is starting to sort of pull and give that sort of enhanced feel of the sort of circular movement of the whole kind of composition that I'm trying to get to. And I can bring some of them echoing down into, so I can imagine they're sort of coming down, and let's get some sort of sweep of circularness kind of coming down into the bottom as well a little bit. And then one thing I definitely want to do is that ear where it's overlapping the moon, I want to paint that in darker again, just so that it's definite kind of silhouette kind of happening against that moon. So I can bring that in darker, so it's standing out stark against that white disc, and it just helps to give that, like, just that little sort of, just cuts out the moon, just that little cut out of the moon shape, I think is quite sort of dramatic. And then when I've got some dark, let's bring some darker tones into the shadows, where I really want those sort of lights to come, like in the eye, just like below that, and a little bit of exaggeration of that sort of darkness on the face, and underneath the chin, just where we sort of have it sort of very dark under there, and bring that through. So we're getting some more kind of like more shadow and more sort of shading, with the moon hopefully being very sort of dominant and very bright in the whole kind of piece. Right, and this is when I would probably now go into using sort of drawing pen. So I've got here a 0.5 just fine liner kind of drawing pen, and what I'm going to try and do is, I don't want to do too much again sort of very sort of realistic kind of drawing, so I'm going to start by just defining the eye in black, so just kind of outlining that shape that I've got in the paint, so that it sort of becomes much stronger. And then it's got a definite kind of pointed sort of section there. It's almost quite a sort of human shape. And then I'm going to start identifying and kind of drawing round the very sort of angular planes of the animal's face that I sort of spoke about before, how, you know, it's really quite sort of sharp and defined in its structure. It's not such a soft face as a rabbit has. And I'm just sort of picking out some of the shapes that I've got to sort of go sort of stronger into darkness, and sort of moving some of these areas and breaking it down into kind of sections, almost like kind of patchwork. Bringing that on top of what I've drawn. And what I don't want is that line there, because it looks like a mouth now. So I'm going to bring some shading lines quite close together to add kind of darkness, some quite strong hatch lines. So I'm working on top of the colours that I've got, and they're still kind of coming through and they're still there, but I'm keeping them kind of dark and using this kind of directional line on the surface, and then again sort of bringing it into areas of shading. So we're getting more graphic and illustrative and less sort of soft with our lines. I want to get them quite angular. So this becomes shading, linear shading on top of paint shading. So it starts to give it immediately a much sort of crisper, stronger kind of outline. And then I can bring in, so where I want the sort of the paw kind of paw divisions of where do they have toes? Do we say toes? What is their toes? But the sort of the pads of the paws kind of coming through. And I can now get that one in behind and sort of claim it back from the blue. And I want to think all the time of this kind of quite angular approach, just identifying these sort of areas on the animal and making it quite sort of straight. And so I've got all the soft watercolour underneath, but I've got then something much more linear and angular on top of it, like that. So this area here, this needs to come, I'm trying to again keep the lines moving in that sort of direction, the same direction as we're going with the shapes, with the movement of the sort of animal. So it becomes sort of quite sort of graphic. So if I come back a bit, there's much more strength now coming through with that, with the black line. So let's take some more, let's get some under here as well, where that's going to come. And I can even bring a whole slice of line sort of coming through under these sort of areas of shadow, and then bring my line work, and I can just start sweeping those lines to mimic some of the form of the animal kind of coming through. And then I want to put some line just around that eye section, and they can almost become like sort of movement lines. They start to become like those whiz lines you get in comic books, but where we can see the animal is moving because of the directional flow of those coming through. And bring those into here, and then into this under, because this has got to be in shadow here because this is sort of behind. So, and then I can bring some more into and just start building up this sort of surface marks of lines. So it's becoming much more kind of graphic, and then I can take some lines going across as well to kind of build up the surface. And just keep blending those through. So it's becoming, so we're getting a sort of feeling of it kind of moving, and I'm wondering if I should get an indication of a second leg behind as well at the top here, so where I can bring just like a sort of reflection of the heel on that side, and then maybe just bring again a sort of hint of the foot coming through on the other side like that. So we have got a feeling now that there is two legs going on, not just one at the back, a bit more. And then we can start to get sort of some curved lines. And where that shoulder becomes muscular, I can then get that sort of fan of line work across through there. And you can start crossing those lines, and it starts to give that, although it's straight lines, it starts to give it a kind of curved sort of feel. This starts to look too much like a sort of a net at the bottom. And so let's bring that up and bring those lines through onto that sort of top surface. And then I can start getting some darkness really sort of towards these edges. I can really build up the lines. And the more I kind of keeping to the angular kind of feel, but then sort of trying to identify like the sort of panels and the areas of the body. I'm going to get more and more expressive, hopefully, and creative with those lines, and get a bit more movement going into them. That's right. I'm starting to feel that I'm getting a bit more movement onto this, and I'm quite liking this angular quality that I've got. And I want to get that round in the nose as well, and then let's get the nose in sort of dark. Let's look at the eye. Let's get some more dark around that. Let's just let that little bit of light show. Oh, that's changed the face a lot, just doing it a little bit, and that really helps. And then I can reduce that white bit down now that I'm quite happy where it is, and just take again some of those lines through there. It's really like a sort of push and pull, and sometimes just one little area will change the whole kind of look and feel of the drawing. It'll give it sort of something you weren't expecting, and that's really good. So I think I need to take a little bit of more shadow into that shoulder because it was sticking out too much. And it's really like sort of, it is very like embroidery in a sense, these sort of lines. You keep on adding the lines in, and you slowly build up more and more of a surface by going back again over and over where you've gone. And the more lines you get on the paper, the darker the areas become. So where you need to get shadow, you get more lines closer in together as a kind of it sounds like very basic, but sometimes it's really good to remind yourself in very basic tones. So the more lines you get on the paper, the less paper showing through, the darker it becomes, and the more that becomes seen as shadow and not just lines on the surface. And sometimes when I do these, I get really into sort of quite definite patterns. You know, I can get sort of patterns of stars and spirals and into the body, which I'm not going to put on this one, but it's another way of approaching it, is to get it quite sort of spiral kind of looking. Right, so let's come back and consider that. Right, so that's now got some more. I'm ignoring that. Sorry, whoever it is can leave a message. I'm sorry, I'm just going to turn that off. Right, so now that I've got that here, I want to think about some of the sort of the borders of the image here, sort of round here, and I want to get some kind of floral kind of feel, or kind of like something like stylized kind of grasses and things kind of going. So I'm thinking about those hogweed. So I'm using a thicker pen just to kind of give that sort of shape sort of fanning out, and then stems kind of coming down, and imagining there's all this sort of undergrowth kind of here. So then this becomes leaves and fronds and ferns kind of coming through, and they're standing out quite stark against the blue background because they're kind of silhouetted. Although the sky's dark, it's still got more light in it than they have, so they become like these silhouette shapes kind of coming underneath. And it gives the idea as well that the hare is leaping because it's now got something that it's leaping over. And then I might think of those fern fronds that kind of come up and they kind of curl, and you get kind of just little shapes of leaf kind of coming round off them. And this can be done in black paint with a fine brush. You can go in with the black fine line pen and add some sort of stark kind of like twig-like forms underneath. You can use brush pen, you could use shades of pencil. I mean, really anything just to give that sort of linear kind of feel of the surface. You can see you can sort of do things out, and if you use a different gauge of pen, so you've got different weight of line going on, it then also gives a sense of distance, so that some of these pieces then, some of this foliage then appears to be further away because it's a finer line. So it helps give a sort of variety of texture and gives a little kind of difference and variety in the marks that you're making. But it's just sort of just to give us a sense of kind of undergrowth that he's leaping over. I mean, I would probably spend some more time sort of getting all that in, but we're getting now this sort of massive full moon kind of effect with the sense of the animal sort of leaping over. Now, I was mentioning previously about how what I wanted to do was to try and get the light catching on the animal, which we haven't really got yet. And so I'm going to slightly have to cheat because I've got some pens here that you probably haven't got. So I totally confess now that you might need to just try this again when you've managed to get one of these other pens, because I'm being really cheaty and that's very unfair of me. And I think I did say, I think it's because last week I said, if you've got some white pens, bring them along. And then I should have resent that email really and got you. But I wanted to still show you the effect. I don't want to sort of not do it because it's something you can work on later. It doesn't have to, it probably works better to let the painting dry a little bit before you come back to it. But if we imagine, I've now got, this is the pen I use quite a lot. It's an acrylic paint marker. And you've got the right one because they sell them for drawing on stones. That's like it's quite a popular hobby now of drawing those sort of mandala patterns on beach pebbles. And these will draw, it's usually, they will draw on pretty much anything. They draw on glass and they draw on wood and they draw on stone. But they're basically like a very fine kind of acrylic paint. And they've got a relatively fine point on them. So what I can come do now is sort of work on the surface and add some flicks of white along the edge of the animal so that it's like the hairs on the back of his neck catching the kind of moonlight, just sort of like that. And where I've got the very dark line of the pen, this starts to stand out kind of really brightly. If I come in a bit closer, you can see how that's starting to act like a highlight. And we can come in on his tail as well and just sort of bring some of this light onto the surface as well. And it just sort of, so again, when I'm looking at the face here, I can then come in and by using these sort of little flick motions, again, it kind of gives me the feel of movement and it gives me the feel of the texture of the fur without it being too obvious. And I find that white pens are, when you get a good one that works, it's great. And then sometimes, you can't seem to predict which one to work. So you can buy like two from the same packet and some of them will work better than others. So you often have to sort of, it's a little bit pot luck with them as to what mood they're in. They like to be stored up with a sort of nib down so that the ink is sort of collecting down the bottom. And these ones you have to kind of pump them to get them to, they've got like a little reservoir of paint. And then I can start bringing in some of these sort of strong lines again of the face and the sort of light. And it then gives it a kind of highlighting effect. And I can come across on the top of the paws and things as well, just to bring some sort of light images into it, some sort of extra light. And then if I want to make, as always, if you want to make something look lighter, one of the things to do is then make the things around it look darker. So where I've got the lights that are coming in there, I then might go back in with my drawing pen and sort of work round some of the hairs that and I mean, oh dear, the fluff, the pelt, and sort of bring a second, almost like an outline, but just in amongst that sort of surface, just to sort of make that stand out. And like along the tail, I can bring some extra dark kind of coming into that to kind of punch that out. And now I'm thinking, right, well, I think I want to get the body a bit darker, because it's now wanting to see it more like this sort of silhouette. So this is when I might go back in and be really brave and go for some washes of much darker colour kind of over this surface, and just working on top of the pen marks that I've got, so that they sort of fade a bit more into the background, and just knock all of that colour sort of much back and much darker, so that he becomes much more of a nighttime kind of creature. So I'm just going to leave little bits of pale kind of colour, and I feel like I need to get him darker all through. I'm going to use blue tone, so he's going to blend a little bit into the sky a bit more, but just to sort of take out some of the light areas, just keeping the main detail of his face. I want to darken the rest of the ears down a bit, but that also sort of softens some of the black marks as well, the sort of pen marks. It's quite an interesting way of working, of kind of going back and forth between the two sort of media. And yeah, I want to get some more darkness into that. And then to begin with, it's quite daunting to sort of imagine sort of taking almost into a silhouette, but you can see how kind of doing that again increases the drama of the image of him being just caught in the moonlight. So who's got that, what's that song by, oh no, it's got up in my head now, Dancing in the Moonlight, that song, that's what I'm hearing in my head now. I'll come back to me as to who sang it now. But I can hear that song going in my head now as I'm imagining the hare kind of like rushing through this midnight field on its business. So I'm adding some blue tone more into that now, so it's becoming really quite Van Morrison, that's it, Dancing in the Moonlight, that's who I'm thinking of. I think, was it Van Morrison? Oh, well, anyway, it's not it's not a music class, so it doesn't matter. Yeah, but that's now sort of, now by bringing that sort of increasing that shadow, it's now really pushed him into a kind of nighttime creature, and blending that sort of across the paint, the pen work softens that effect of it as well. So it's sort of, although it's there, it's quite dark. It stops it being too linear, and you can see how we didn't think it was going to have this sort of feel when we started with the pen work. It sort of changed it again. So I'm now adding a lot more blue tones, because this is becoming like blue shadow, and I'm really liking where it's going. I'm just leaving this sort of top areas of his body in, leaving the warm tones in the sort of, so in the shadows I'm now coming back in with kind of blues and bringing that through, and that's starting to get that real sense that he's in shadow, that we're in night, and it's not a sort of spotlit animal, that it is an animal that's part of the night and it's coming out at night. And I've just left that little patch of light on the elbow there, the way it's just sort of catching, just to sort of draw attention to that. And again, on the top of the thigh, just that little bit, and the rest of it's going to be quite dark and just going to be pushed right into shadow. So if I come back, yeah, see now he's become much more nighttime, much more sort of creature of, and this moon becomes sort of very big. And I quite like sometimes leaving these big areas of the moon, gives this big sort of hole of white in the paper, but it makes sort of sense. It makes sense of this scene to sort of really give that moon some power. And then down with this sort of foliage now, I'm quite tempted to come in with some blue paint, and work along some of those shapes sort of around the bottom, just to kind of play with them and gives them a bit more solidity, just with the blue and I could work more into that if I wanted to maybe put some shadows of those. So like those forms that I've developed for sort of hogweed and stuff, just to bring them in, but repeat them again in kind of blue ink, but much sort of softer. So they've got like echoey kind of ghost shapes of that surface underneath. And then I can go with my white pen, and again, thinking about highlights, some of the plants might just be catching the light as well. So I can just come in and just put little tiny light sort of moments where that plant is just catching some moonlight, just sort of edging it through there. And underneath his tummy, if I put a tiny row of light just in the way that that photograph that we were looking at just sort of starts to show that the light is catching in those hairs. And I mean I mean the pelt type hair. Not that's something we delivered to my front door, but luckily I've got a porch they can hide it in. They don't have, you can just drop it and run away. And that just starts to give that sense of the moonlight just catching on the edge of him. And I think possibly under the chin as well, that we can just have it just catching that little bit of light there. And up on the ears, I think we can have them just sort of a little blast of light around the edge, and let's get that a highlight into the eye, because that always helps to bring that to life and make it look much more alive. And I'll probably get a little bit more in there. And then I think with this white pen again, I would probably come in to spend a bit more time and just echoing that white shape of the moon with some sort of line work, just sort of coming around, and that sort of has that moonbeam feel, just to sort of add that in. And just to sort of echo that shape, and it starts to sort of have the feeling of moonbeams kind of coming out from that shape, and it's got to radiate all the way around. And sort of bring that through. So if I'm stepping back from that a bit, if I can get my camera to do that back, then we've got, and just about get it all in, we can see we've got this sort of, we're getting a sense of light and shade now where this sort of animal is lit up, but we also get the feeling that it's at night time, that it's not sort of, that it is part of the night, that it is sort of got some shadow to it. I could even put a little bit more blue on that, real sort of blue tone. Just going to go over and put a little bit more on. But having those more natural colours underneath means that when you add the blue in and you don't put it over the whole creature, it doesn't completely become a monochrome, you know, completely unnatural. It just sort of adds that sort of shadow, and by leaving that little hint of rust showing through in the highlights, or the sort of warmer colour, it just gives you a hint of what the colour the animal actually is in the daylight. But it's just giving it that moon nighttime quality. And you could totally paint it all in shades of blue, and that probably look quite nice, probably look quite dramatic. But I'm just going to leave just little hints of terracotta showing through, so it's got some warmth just where the highlight comes. And I hope you can see how the black line work has almost vanished into the paint now. So it initially started looking quite stylised, but we've actually managed to soften it with the paint, and it's still there. It's still giving its texture to the pelt of the animal. So it's really working to give this sort of broken, earning its keep, not just being black lines, but now doing a bit more to it as well. And there we go. So we've taken our hair from being sort of quite a flat kind of bright shape to being something that's very much in shadow. But by creeping up on it gradually, we haven't scared ourselves by going straight into painting it black and going too far. But I think you can see how just adding those tones has really sort of turned it from a daylight kind of creature into a nighttime creature. And I would be quite, I mean, I think I would probably, if I had some more time, I'd probably add a bit more detail to the moon, maybe some areas of just very pale grey pen work, or even some gold and silver, some silver pen work on there, just to kind of give it that kind of moon-like, bit more moon quality. Although I quite like it being a sort of big sort of blank. But I think I need to let it dry for a bit now, and then I'll probably do some extra detailing on sort of into this where you've got this sort of surface here. I'd be quite tempted to come in and just pick up some tiny, that's come out too big really, but just some little silver white kind of lights on the edge of the fur and sort of exaggerate that effect just in this sort of top area a bit more. You can see how that's starting to again give it that feel of sparkled sort of light just catching on all the tips of the hairs like that. And that's almost trying not to do. And so you can see that's again just going back again and just exaggerating that feel. And I could go in and do some sort of silver work on that too with a silver pen in the same kind of way, just to give it a really ethereal kind of feel. So once I've got that paint down, this is why I love white pens so much, because once you've got that paint down, you can then go back in and just give that real gleam of highlight, and it brings that surface to light so much. Just to give it that sort of texture. So if I come in a bit closer, you can see how that's just exaggerating that fall, but it gives it a sort of very silvery kind of quality. And still thinking about the direction of the fur, so the fur would be kind of growing over that way. So that's kind of the way that I'm taking the pen mark. I'm not going to be doing vertical. They're going to definitely still be, oh come on, pen needs a pump. Definitely going to be sort of horizontal little flicks. And they're coming through. And right round the eye as well, I can just gently flick some of that into the dark, that patch of the fur, and just bring up on the face there. And I just slightly lost that line that comes down there, so I can just establish that with a little bit of white pen just on the sort of face there and on the cheeks. And you can get like silvery blue gel pens and all sorts of pens that can have some really good effects, and I think I might have one lurking under here, under my workbench. I've got I've got a pack of gel pens, like kids gel pens, but they're sort of quite, and this is a blue one. So again, I can work in, so this reads slightly more as shadow, but it's sort of somewhere in between, but it has got a slightly metallic surface to it, so it adds a little bit of shine, which comes across probably better when you can move around. But I'm now using a blue in the same sort of way to work in some more texture, but in the shadow areas, just with that sort of blue detail. And that just takes it a little bit lighter. It gives me more control to get that texture in and the sort of difference of it. And then in the same route, I've got another pen that is like a pale creamy colour, or a sort of gold. I'm going to use some gold because that will read as, and I can just, on the areas of that I want to keep brown, I can just flick some actual little gold highlights on it, which will come to life in the flesh. You'll be able to see them just catching the light a bit, and it just adds. Nothing wrong with a bit of bling. Who doesn't like a bit of bling on a drawing? It's just quite nice having that in contrast. I don't know if it'll come across on the camera, but you might just slightly see it catching the light a little bit. But it just adds some sort of warmth. So, okay. Oh, well, we're just about time to stop, I'm afraid. So let me take a step back with the camera, and that's kind of our finished image as far as I can get it on the screen. And then I will switch back to my